All right. Do this. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the 5th episode of the Long Lost Explorer podcast. I am now on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and almost everything. I probably spent a whole day indexing my RSS feed to every single platform, so I'm on that as well. Got a new logo as well. My dad hated it because I had the communist symbol on it. And to give him a little brief introduction, today I'm going to be talking about Seattle, Washington, just the greater Seattle area. Seattle has dramatically changed. We have been on the news quite a bit, usually for the worse, unfortunately. A lot of people have been hearing about Chaz and Chop and the riots and the homelessness issue, the drug issue, the tents, everything. And it's been pretty crazy. So I decided to bring my father on. My father is probably one of the smartest people that I know. And I'm not just saying that because he's my father. He's very intellectual and he does his research when it comes to a lot of the politics and when it comes to subjects like these. So I wanted to have a talk with him today and welcome Scott Fisken. How you doing?
I appreciate being able to be on your show, Spencer. I'm excited about it.
Yes, I am. And I know we're going to be kind of going into, probably going to be debating a lot of this stuff. So just because we both have lived here basically our whole lives. So,
Sure.
So I want to start just kind of not pre-Seattle, but old Seattle. When you were, relatively my age or even younger, how was it? Was there a lot of major issues at the time? Was it pretty relaxed and calm? Was it kind of going up? How was it like?
Obviously it seemed a lot calmer than right now. I mean, I think the whole country did, but as you mentioned earlier, we're getting quite a bit of focus in the national media as to the Chop and the Chaz and the recent protests. But Seattle, and everybody says it, but it's true. Seattle was a much, much smaller city when I was young. There was no professional sports teams. I mean, we all rooted for San Francisco 49ers or the Los Angeles Rams. Eventually, we got a basketball team, football team, and baseball team, of course. So I really feels like, I mean, even more so my mom, but it really feels like I grew up with Seattle. And I think most of the growth was good. I think some of the current growth is pretty fast, and I think with fast growth comes both a lot of good and a lot of bad.
What do you mean by like current growth? Like just around 2020, like 2015 to 2020? Or?
Yeah, probably. Really the Amazon surge. I mean, the Microsoft surge in the 80s and 90s. I guess that would have been probably in the 90s and the early 2000s. That was technically outside of Seattle over in Redmond, and the overall area grew with kind of the Microsoft surge and the tech surge. But Amazon has probably had the biggest impact on Seattle of all the major corporations that are based in Seattle. And again, I think this growth has been a combination. I think some good has come from that, but it's really made it difficult to live in the city. The values of any city that's growing in population obviously continue to rise, but when they rise very quickly, I think the infrastructure and the impacts on the area can be rougher when it happens as fast as it did here.
Mm-hmm. So pretty relaxed earlier. Was there any major like issues that were kind of going on in back in the day? Do you
I mean,
Seattle
throughout
had, like, any big struggles?
Yeah, Seattle has had kind of an interesting past. I think it kind of has an impression nationally as, a very passive city, a passive people, and at one level I think they are. But there was some, pretty high level anti-war protests, civil rights protests. I mean, throughout the history of everything that played out in the country, it definitely played out here. Union battles going all the way back into the 30s. And so I think it is kind of quiet and passive compared to some cities that have a very rough reputation, but it went through much of the same things the other major cities in the nation went through as it, over the last several decades.
Didn't we have an annual riot, like the WTO riots, or? Is
That
that what
one
it's
kind of put
called?
us on the map. I forget the year. It was in the early to late 90s. Maybe it was even early
I
2000s.
think it was early
But
2000s. Yeah.
there was a 2002. Maybe I heard someone say on the radio the other day, which is now 18 years ago. But there was a pretty big riot in Seattle during, I think it was the first or one of the first WTO meetings. And it kind of put us on the map for protest. I think it was more the event than the city. I think people came to protest that event no matter where the city would have been. But since it was held here,
Mm.
that's probably, I'm not going to call that the first protest slash riot that people broke store windows, because I think that activity to some degree goes way, way, way back. But this was kind of the first of the modern protests that we see playing
Hmm.
out now, as far as modern groups like Antifa and stuff.
Do you think those people who were protesting, or do you think they were pretty much kind of the same type of class of character when it came to Antifa, or do you believe that they were kind of more common city people, regular working class people, not necessarily socialist or anything like that?
Well, I think all protests have had the combination of people involved in them. There's, at the one end of the spectrum, the people that are just genuinely concerned with the issue. They're not interested at all in property damage, breaking laws, just wanted to voice their concerns about the issue of the protest. Then obviously
Hmm.
at the other end of the spectrum, you got people that may or may not even know ultimately what the protest is about. They're just taking advantage of the protest to cause trouble. So I think
Hmm.
over time, right now, I think we see, um, based on the whole George Floyd protest that started a couple of months ago, I think the first couple of weeks, possibly, disproportionately, the people protesting were people that were just extremely upset at watching the video
Hmm.
of the police abuse. And I think as the days and weeks go by, the percentage changes, and I don't know if I want to call them good people, but the people who are just genuinely protesting the issue somewhat drift away from the movement.
Hmm.
And the core and the Antifa types who might be using the unfortunate event of George Floyd's death as the excuse to,
They're kind of opportunist.
absolutely opportunist for the situation and to push for fundamental change. It could have been a different guy's name that happened a week later. And so it's become about George Floyd. But I think, I really think the subject of police abuse absolutely needs to be on the table. It needs to be watched. It needs to be discussed. But to use that to cause trouble is, I don't think, a good idea, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously we have family members that are in the police as well, so we have obviously a lot of sympathy for them because we know that there are, I mean, majority of them are, good. We've been around them and stuff, and we've dealt with them many times, and there has never really been a problem with that. And it is kind of shocking to see. And I know we get asshole cops and stuff. I'll just kind of just joke around, but I think the Kent area is just, you have a lot of angry people since you have a lot of people street racing over there.
Yes,
But yeah,
yes,
yeah, that's one funny thing about the Kent area. Apparently, we have one of the most popular street racing areas in the world, which is
yes.
really surprising. I don't know why, but it is. It's been going on this whole time. Has it always been going on since you were younger?
Street racing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was big. So anybody who listens who's familiar with Seattle and remembers the '60s and the '70s, and even into the '80s, Golden Gardens out in Ballard was just a huge. I mean, they would have races that were almost as organized as Seattle International Raceway. I remember I even had a teacher in high school tell me a story that he and a buddy were out fishing in Puget Sound, and they'd gone out the night before. They'd gone out like Friday and like slept on the boat, and they were going to wake up early on Saturday and fish. And they were just off, Seattle, there off of Ballard, and they said they could see and hear the racing going on into the night out of Golden Gardens. And it was just a great area. I mean, people would go there and cruise and show off their cars in the daytime and stuff too, but at night, it's the perfect setup because you've got this long parking lot, and as you leave the park, it's a stop sign that just leads to a very long straight street that they would race out of the parking lot down through Shoal there. But and back to police. It's funny when you mention that. I remember when I was growing up on Queen Anne Hill, there was a couple of police officers, partners, and their name might pop into my mind. Their name jumped out of my mind, but we all knew as kids, so and so and so and so. These two cops' names. They used to harass and shake down the kids, and I think they would write, BS tickets and measure the height of your car if you jacked it up a little bit or something. I don't remember them ever being, over the top, abusive or anything. But there's always the ones that maybe abuse their power a little bit, and that's not good. But I think the direction that some of these people want to take this subject it makes me very nervous that it's actually going to make this subject worse. We're not focusing on the few that need to be shook out of the system and that are actually causing the trouble. We're focusing on all of them as a group. And it's shocking the number of people that don't realize the police force is ultimately there to look out for us and protect us all. And they're the first person we all reach to call if we're in trouble.
Yeah. And from my perspective, how I've been kind of taking in things, I feel like they want to make a more of a system that is like Australia or England. I think they want to have kind of more of a community style versus a police with guns, kind of more an aggressive approach. They want more of a passive approach to the police force.
Yeah, and actually the realistic portion of the group might want that, and that's worth having on the table and talking about. I often talk about the in smaller communities that have like a small downtown core. I think recently we saw some bicycle police officers in our community, and I like that a lot. They can stop and say hi to the small business guy and talk on the sidewalk for a minute. I do think the police do need to be more closely plugged into the community at that level. I don't think the fact that they're not is the problem, but I do think more of that does help. And I think that this division, this gradual growing division between the police and the citizens of a city, more so in certain cities than others, I think it's bad, and I do think it works against both parties. But I also think there are groups that are promoting this division because I think they believe using the subject of that division can cause them to achieve some changes in society that otherwise the majority of people would not be interested in having.
True, but also I think that generally in Seattle, if you do walk around, you do see the bike police, and you do see, other police officers and security guards just kind of walking around. Main area that I'm thinking at is kind of Chinatown around Wajimaya, heading towards like the stadium and stuff like that. It's kind of cramped over there, so you have a lot of people, cops, bike people, and a lot of foot traffic over there and stuff. So you do see them kind of communicate with them, and I don't think it's necessarily there is a lack. There might be a little bit of lack or whatever, but you're also getting people from different towns or from outside of Seattle saying that, oh, it's horrible, it's super bad, and they don't have a true perspective of it, and they're just trying to they're adding fuel to the flame.
Sure.
And you also have people, I mean, this just kind of goes back to my marketing and what I see online. You have a lot of people who are motivated, who are getting paid, that are part of an organization to basically feed whatever bullshit to kind of divide and to get the subject. And what I see is that the what their strategy is let's pull as far as we can. We're not going to get all the way there, but it will bring us closer to what we want. We pull so rapidly far into a direction, we kind of negotiate for the middle, then we get, you know what I'm saying? You kind of reach for the moon.
I do.
You reach for, or you shoot for the stars, or something like that.
Sure. Like in any negotiating tactic, if I need 5 steps and I ask for 10 and I compromise and go with 5, I get everything I needed. I do get that. But societal change is an interesting thing, because I think one thought is, number one, it is always changing. Number two, if it organically changes, and if it changes in the right period of time, it's positive change, it's good change, it's permanent change. Anybody calling for fundamental transformations or radical change, even if the goal of the change is supposedly positive, I believe too abruptly and too quickly works against the society. If the direction they want that change is good, we will go that direction. Wanting to speed it up subtly, I get that a little bit too, but 180 degrees or fundamental transformation, I don't think is good for a society.
Yeah, I could see most of it, how, just definitely on a cultural aspect of how things are, can be really bad. But what would you make the argument for, let's just say, deregulation? I know, obviously, when people are going to listen to you, they're going to realize you're a little bit more on the right side of the spectrum of things.
Sure.
But
sure.
say if you how it takes forever to deregulate some things or to reduce taxes, or one major thing that I've been kind of been thinking about a lot is basically just cutting programs, because our national our debt is somewhere, I don't know where it at. I'll just say 25 trillion or something like that.
Yeah, I think it jumped almost to 25 or 26 recently. Obviously, with COVID relief, it took an extra big jump this year.
But like having people go and attack that head on, because I mean, you keep doing that for another 10 years, we're going to be screwed. We our $100 is going to be pretty much like $1 here. We're going to be hyperinflated, and things are just going to go to crap. So how do you feel about when it comes to an economic change like that, trying to push a little bit faster in certain directions?
Yeah, I think there's government assistance, government spending, government helping problems. Obviously, it's beyond just they should or shouldn't help on a particular problem. I think a lot of it has to do with at what level the help comes from. I think if the city or the state helps a particular problem financially through government, I think that's a better idea, because we have 50 very different states, and we've got a federal government that is just wildly out of control with their spending. There's incentives to spend more built into the system. And so I think sometimes the argument comes down to government should help poor people, let's say as an example, or government should not help poor people. I think that overly simplifies the argument.
What government? The federal government or the state government? Or the
well, this is my point. Many people would say, they might use the word generically, that government should help poor people. I would say I'm more sympathetic to that argument if it's the state government helping the citizens of that state versus the federal government. I think the federal government taking in all of this money and then just sending it back to the states, by definition, keeps it inefficient, because some of that money is taken up within the overhead of the transferring it back and forth to Washington, D.C. and back to the state. So how much the state should or shouldn't.
A dollar goes in and 20% or 20% is actually used.
Something like that. Exactly. Whatever the number is, some disappears, and every penny that disappeared would have been able to help that particular poor person or that group or whatever the program was designed to help. So I think that it's easier to make the case.
GoFundMe is more efficient. They only take 10%.
That's right. That's it. That's it. So I would like to. I mean, these debates will go on forever, and they need to. In a democracy, it's a good thing. But I would like to see more people realize that the more that's handled at the local level, I think it strengthens all of us, and it leaves more help where it's needed.
Mm-hmm. But how do you change that? I think one of the big things is obviously education as well, but like I know we talked about, the Department of Education coming in 1986.
Actually, it was 7980.
7980. Okay, yeah. What happened in 86? I'm not sure, but they took away civics. They took away, kind of a lot of things as well. Do you think there is kind of a subtle indoctrination uh, uh, of not necessarily an indoctrination, but just basically kind of dumbing down or increasing the ignorance of government itself? Because because I feel like for me, I know pretty basic things about government, and a lot of people can't even say the three branches of government or all the departments in the government, or things like that. So do you feel like education is kind of hurting us just because of how it's transformed throughout the years, or what?
I actually think it's one of our biggest failures. I think that there are children or kids, let's say your generation versus my generation, that know things that their parents or grandparents didn't know because of technological advancements and certain items in that area. But I do believe we are losing the basic core of knowledge, which I think is hurting society in a very big way. And how and why it happened, I mean, there's many people that have opinions and speculate how and why this is all played out. But I do believe our education system is failing us. And speaking of federalizing versus keeping things more at the state and the local level, I don't believe the Department of Education is educating a single child. I do believe it is consuming resources that could go to paying teachers more.
Mhm.
And I hope someday we do take a very serious look at this issue, because a gentleman named Joseph Sobran had a famous quote about education, which is 100 years ago, high school students were studying Latin, and today college students are studying remedial English.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, it's true, and I've seen some of the people coming in. They have to retake algebra classes
Right,
in college, and
right.
they have to get up to a certain level. So they're overspending. If you are taking a college class for algebra, they're still they're charging you a lot of money for it, and
Yes.
that's putting them even to more debt. So you have to take an extra year of mathematical education to just start on whatever your major is. So if you want to become an engineer, God, you're going to take 5 or 6 years of of extra classes to make up all the math and stuff like that. And
Sure.
yeah, it's really weird because you got educated without the Department of Education.
Yes, I was a junior in high school, and they created the Department of Education. And it's like any government solution. I mean, it's easy to create uh, a department and to staff it with a bunch of people and have lofty goals of fixing and making things better. But unfortunately, we tend to judge government programs by their intentions and not by their results.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember you sending me an article that through with all the money and everything that's spent, like I think the SAT scores or something went up only like 1%. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the specifics, but they they change
Something
how they measure
increased.
things. They change how they measure things. Also, I mean, we've all seen the videos, and they present them as fun, and they are funny in a way when they'll go interview random kids on college campuses and ask them relatively basic questions, and they have no idea. And these are not high school dropouts. These are kids that are continuing their education beyond high school, and often at very prestigious universities.
Yeah, like
And it should
Berkeley
shock
and
us
stuff like
all.
that. Yeah.
Absolutely. It should
Hmm.
shock us all how little they know. And I do think the focus, even down into the K through 12, but especially at the college level, I think the focus is, whether you want to call it political indoctrination or whether you want to call it even advancing particular agendas, once that is the motivation and you are teaching it to young people who often it appears don't even have a basic grasp on some pretty simple knowledge about our system, as you mentioned earlier, so what used to be taught in civics. It's nerve-wracking how little they know and intelligent they believe they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is kind of interesting. And I know you make fun of me because I was born in 89, so I just hit a week before 1990. So
Right,
I just
right.
hit that threshold of I forgot what your quote was, but I feel like I'm just right in the middle where I am educated enough, but I also have the experience with that kind of newer generation of.
Sure, and there, people sometimes think this talk is a critical of individual teachers, and it's not at all. I would say, I don't know what the percentage is. The vast majority of teachers that teach, their heart is in it. They are very serious about it. As you know, my cousin was a teacher for years.
Yeah.
We may or may not even have the same politics, but I know she was very, um,
Passionate.
yeah, absolutely passionate and committed to the education of students. And again, I believe the vast majority of teachers out there, that is where they're coming from. But again, I also believe they get lost in the shuffle because I do not believe teachers get enough of the money that is spent on education. Often you hear that we should spend more on education, so the teachers should get paid more. I would make the case they should get more of a higher percentage of what is currently being spent.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if it was more private as well, I mean, it's a complicated system, but I mean, were the teachers getting paid well before the Department of Education?
I think we spend. I know we spend more per capita in essentially every major city in this country than we did in the '60s, '70s, and '80s. Some cities I think have gone up faster than others. Some cities have gone up slower.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the teachers historically have been a high paid profession, even when I was young. I
Mm-hmm.
think again, I understand when people say it's an extremely valuable job to society, and we should be the we should pay teachers more crowd, we'll call them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm completely with their desire for the teachers to make more money. I'm not with them when it comes to dumping additional funds into a system that I don't think spends the money very well. I think they get a lot of money now. And unfortunately, I wish the teachers' unions would fight for a bigger percentage of what is being spent as opposed to just trying to increase the total. Because as spending has gone up, again, even accounting for inflation, the test scores and the product has come down, and in no other business do you see more getting thrown at something when when the product becomes more and more inferior.
Yeah. I mean, and I feel like that would be more of an argument to kind of privatize a lot more. You hear all these like kind of boarding schools, getting bashed up. So it is kind of a funnier subject than just like it's not necessarily like a restaurant or some other sort of business because it is your child's future, and if you get a bad product and they get older and stuff, that does kind of have like a long-term effect rather than just having a bad meal and you just get sick for a week and stuff. You're kind of messing with their education. But so I feel like in the beginning, if there was kind of a straight privatization of a school, just like kind of this rapid change, and this is probably where you're right, where there needs to be kind of like a slow change or a transition into. But I feel like teachers could get paid more because instead of having all that, the bureaucratic structure where there's a million people and they're just sitting around not really putting in value for the system, is that a lot of those jobs would go away. And if there was a higher demand for teachers, and teachers would have more of a negotiating power too, they live in Seattle for some reason, they would have more negotiating power for a higher wage. And if they have a certain specialization, like, oh, I am a certified teacher in Russian, STEM, or some of these outlier things, they get paid more as well. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I think years ago they created a concept, and I don't remember how. This is when I was in school, and I don't remember how long it lasted. And they created schools that they called magnet schools. And so when you mentioned STEM and Russian, there was so a school would be known for two or three subjects that they would go much deeper in, and you'd still get your well-rounded curriculum of all the classes that you had to take, but whether it was foreign language, whether it was what today they call STEM or some other subjects, they would go much deeper in those. And they literally attracted kids to go to a different school than their neighborhood school based on what was offered in those schools. I think it's a great idea. I mean, it's similar to the charter school idea. And as you may know, a gentleman named Thomas Sowell, who's written many books on these type of subjects, his most recent book that just came out, which I haven't read yet, but it is about charter schools. And he literally documents in the book there are charter schools in this country that are in the exact same building as the public school. They serve the exact same kids from the exact same neighborhood, and they're getting a much, much different result. So you see attacks on charter schools. Right now, there are districts, I believe Los Angeles district is refusing to go, the teachers union is refusing to go back to school based on COVID, but they're saying they will only go back to school if X, Y, and Z happens. And one of the things they would like to happen is to have charter schools eliminated. And I'm just concerned why they are threatened by something that I've heard discussions about the book Mr. Sowell wrote, but I haven't read it yet. Why they're threatened about something that is literally giving this country a better product for a lower cost.
Yeah. No, I have my views. I mean, I feel like we all kind of have our views on it. It kind of baffles my mind too, where I'm, pretty libertarian about things. It's like, if you want to take your kid to your school, if you think it's better for you, then good. I have my own opinion, so why do you care? But I think that it could. I think when you basically have the monopoly on power, and it is challenged, there is a threat, and there's going to be pushback against it. It just it's human nature. It's human nature, but yeah, I do think that's so weird. I don't know why the government, especially, is fighting against it. I mean, obviously, there's the unions, and there's people that feel threatened to lose their job because they're so complacent in the system as well that they don't want things to change.
Right.
Because if I'm a marketer and stuff. If my job was taken away just because of changes, what do you call that? Something destruction. What's that theory? A creative destruction,
right?
Throughout industries and stuff like that. I have to kind of innovate and change and kind of learn some new skills to kind of be ahead or find a different industry to go. And those kind of stay put, and those don't really change. I think there should be education just for more hands-on learners, because I sucked at school just because I hated reading. I wanted to actually physically do it. I'm in woodshop. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. This is so cool. Show me how to do this. Or we do some kind of science experiment or lab where I'm like using my hands and stuff like that. I think they should kind of do some innovative things like that where you have those auditory, kinesthetic, I forgot the third one, those type of learners to excel at that, because people do learn in different ways, and you're just kind of in this monolithic institution where you're just kind of learning the same way as everybody else, and that's just not how things work for everybody.
Absolutely. And this is one area that I believe schools are also failing, is they've really stepped back made continuous steps back away from teaching the trades. I think there's a shortage of people to work in the trades. I think for decades, it was most parents' dream to have their child go to college and get a high education, or high paying white collar job. I mean, nobody wouldn't want that necessarily, but I think there was such a focus on that. There was such a push for higher education that many kids went on to higher education and did not finish, which left them with student debt, which has all kinds of impacts. As you know, Mike Rowe, the Dirty Jobs guy, he's a great guy. He's really made the case that not that college isn't good for certain students. Of course it is. We need doctors, we need lawyers, we need people that higher education is required for those fields. But we have a huge void right now in the trades, not only people who can and are qualified to work in the trades, but who even understand what it takes to work in those fields. And many of the jobs in those fields can be rewarding and well-paying jobs, whether they're technically considered professional jobs or not.
Yeah, and so I work in the construction industry, and I basically was told by, it's a guy who's kind of in some like plumbing network group or whatever, and because we get a lot of work through them, and he basically said, if you want to become a multimillionaire, start a plumbing. If you're 18, 20 years old or whatever, learn how to do plumbing, start a plumbing company, and you will get more work than you could imagine, just because all the baby boomers are dying off and retiring.
Yes.
And a lot of those people are in the trades. So yeah, there is going to be this huge demand in trade and very low supply. And I basically tell everybody who's younger, they're like, what form of construction should I go into? I'm just like, I basically say any.
Sure.
I usually say plumbing, just because it's more specialized and you definitely make a lot more money doing it, but almost any. Yeah, if you're listening to this right now, and if you're 18, and if you want to make a hell of a lot of money and go into a trade, yeah, do plumbing or pretty much any form of construction. So
absolutely,
it's going to be a weird thing. This is going to be kind of a weird time when this shift fully goes through.
Well, the good news is there's a huge all those retiring, those individuals retiring based on that age group and that disproportionate number of people within that population based on that many people being born during those years. I saw something, just the same thing you mentioned, and this was a Seattle specific thing, but I'm sure this is happening everywhere. And it was something about Seattle City Light, and they were talking about some of the linemen who work on their equipment, and I forget what the number was. 80% of them were all like 52 to 58 or whatever. There was just this huge group that they were practically panicking on being able to replace these people in time. And these were jobs that paid $100,000 a year plus, and good benefits too, working for a city utility. Yeah. And there's a lot of opportunity out there right now. Of course, I know we're in the middle of COVID. When I say right now, I don't mean just at this exact moment, but there is a lot of opportunities right now. And back to kind of where we came from to this point in the conversation, when it comes to schools, I really think they need to get as much a focus on the trade path as they have for the college path, and allowing the kids themselves to decide which path feels like is a better fit for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I definitely think a lot of it should be pushed. I mean, you take these kids. I mean, I went to college and I'm making a decent amount of money, but I'm seeing some of the other people I work with or that I run into and stuff, no debt or anything at all, and they're making a lot more than me right now. I wish they,
sure,
but granted, they are working probably 5 times physically harder than I ever would. So
right, and I hope you see your college debt as an investment and as something that over time will show a return.
Yeah, no, I already feel like it has been giving me a return as it is, and I'm still working on that. I'm probably much further than a lot of my other peers.
Sure.
But yeah. So I definitely do see it. But how do we were talking about COVID a little bit and stuff. What is your opinion on the response with COVID in Seattle?
This thing's been so strange, and I guess someday, 3 years, 5 years from now, whenever, we'll look back and try to figure out what was handled right, what was handled wrong. I think that I think that a lot of people did their best to figure out what we should or shouldn't do. I know Dr. Fauci gets quite a bit of criticism. He said masks don't matter. Then he said they do matter. He's, a lot of the experts have been all over the place a little bit. And I don't know if it's necessarily so much incompetence as it was there. Nobody was exactly really sure how this thing would play out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think personally, myself, I don't know how or why I came up with this, but I made the assumption at one point that the death rate may be in the 70 to 80,000 range, and obviously at this point it's doubled that. So that's it has definitely had a bigger impact than I fear it may or believed it might early on. I think that as much as we didn't know in January and February going into March, we do know a lot more now, and I think some of the good news about COVID is that we have determined that it tends not to be fatal to people that do not have underlying conditions. Mm-hmm. And whether that's senior citizens or a middle-aged person with, multiple comorbidities or something. So I believe, whether it's ultimately a vaccine that's developed, whether it's the therapeutics that are being worked on now, I think getting the death rate under control is critical. We know from the people who get COVID and are ultimately asymptomatic or have a mild case, we do know there's many people that will get it and will not have a negative impact on. But I do think it's something we need to be serious on. As far as the shutdowns, I think some of the states are a little too aggressive on the shutdown, but I'm all for realistic steps that appear to make sense, may slow the progress of the disease, the social distancing, the masks in areas where you cannot social distance. I think all makes sense, but I'm still concerned about the societal impact on how severe the economic shutdown was. I think the downside of how far and how long that went is still not completely fully understood yet.
I think one thing that is basically impossible for politicians who are a little bit more on the, I wouldn't say pro-economic side, but that are willing to give a little bit more risk to make sure that people are, not going unemployed, losing their jobs or the houses, all that kind of stuff. It's hard for a politician to basically expose their triage and their risk and reward, benefit reward. And so I think it's kind of an easier argument for people to just say, nope, stay inside, mask up, we'll just give you a lot of money and all that stuff. But I know there's a group on the other side that's saying, look, we're 25 trillion in debt. People are going to be losing their houses. We can't lock them in. We need, some personal responsibility to go on them. I don't know. It seems kind of complicated. I mean, what do you say if you are kind of more on that side? Are you
I think
transparent about it, or
I think how much relief, where the relief is, how government can help bridge this period between whatever the normalcy was before COVID and how we come out of it at the end. I think, as an example, I think certain mortgage companies have done programs where for 3 months, for 6 months, for this period of time, you have zero payments. And then once the payments start again, they add those 3 or 6 months on the end of the loan. So you technically still ultimately owe all the money, but anything that defers the payments for 3 or 6 months, and then at the third or sixth month, you have to ultimately make all that back up and continue to pay currently. I don't think stuff like that is realistic. We're all hearing in the news, because it's going on right now, about paying people unemployment if somebody receives more in unemployment than they actually did at their job.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a good idea? Is that really helping the problem? It is complicated how and where and when to help. I think, again, deferring payments is almost better than giving somebody the money, because that's directly where the help is needed.
Yeah.
And again, I know different parts of the country are facing different levels of this, but I guess my hope is that most states, most cities can do their best to be open, partially open, as open as they can be, to allow as much economic activity as possible, which is what is ultimately required for government to get their hands on the money to ultimately help these people. So I get it that it's a tough balance, and hopefully, I don't think they're technically calling this a second wave or round we're in now, but I'm watching the numbers. I'm seeing some flattening even in these areas that resurged, like Florida, and
Mm-hmm.
even King County resurged and now is showing some flattening again. So hopefully we can find a balance that keeps enough open, keeps enough economic activity going. So number one, fewer people do need the help. And number two, there is economic activity that generates revenue to be able to give the people the money that do the help.
Well, I also think that there is a little too much of a hype on it, and why I say that is just a few theories, but also a few facts as well. Hospitals do get paid more for COVID deaths than the regular deaths.
Yes.
So there's an incentivization for the hospitals to report more COVID deaths and everything like that. So let's just say I had COVID, but I took too much insulin and I died. I had a seizure and I died. And they'll do a thing. They'll say I had COVID. I might be like one of these asymptomatic people, but I died realistically of an insulin overdose or something like that, or people having a heart attack. Like one of the articles I saw, and it's sad. It was I think it was like a brother and sister, and they said they were young, healthy, and they died of COVID. You look at the picture, and they show just basically kind of like from the shoulders up. These were morbidly obese kids that were close to 400 pounds, and they died of COVID. And so, I don't even know if they necessarily died of COVID, because you see how heavy they are and how unhealthy they were. And yeah, it's just kind of ridiculous. So,
well, and there's no question that, and this is what we're learning and seeing, that it definitely attacks the weak, and the weak can be defined, when I say weak, the weak can be defined as somebody very late in years, somebody with pre-comorbidities or multiple comorbidities, or as you said, these two young people probably wouldn't have died if they wouldn't have gotten COVID, but it is definitely attacking the less healthy, again, based on age or other conditions. And that's why I think protecting seniors as much as possible is definitely a very good idea. And where focus needs to be, as far as throughout society, I think keeping the numbers, the growing cases, as flat and as moderate as we can to prevent hospitalizations from being overcrowded. I mean, that was definitely a concern early on. The death rate definitely did not spike with this current round of positive cases. Again, I think this is a good sign. I think they're getting a handle on
the death rate is going down.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen in a couple cities it followed the spike up a little bit, but nowhere near the same arc on the way up. So I do think we are in the process of getting this thing under control. And again, even the top experts have kind of gone back and forth on a couple of issues of what we should or shouldn't do. So I'm not, necessarily saying that as a criticism to them, but if they're doing their best, that's all we can really do with this thing, is to do our best and build on what we learn as it plays out.
Yeah. Have you heard of the mass exodus of Washington and California because of how strict the COVID not regulations, but the whatever their suggestions, their policies, whatever you call that, their mandates or whatever.
Absolutely, I have, and to tell you the truth, there may be an additional surge in this, but this is a phenomenon that's actually been going on this last 10 or 20 years, and we'll talk a little bit more about the police if you want in Seattle, because that's kind of a real change that's taken place currently as opposed to the past. But people have been leaving New York, people have been leaving California in such large numbers. I believe I heard at one point to rent a U-Haul to go from California to Texas was something like $2,600 or whatever it was, but it was only $800 to rent from Texas back to California. So it's signs like that show what people are doing.
Of the demand.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's very interesting to see.
And I think that there's always been people have moved from state to state throughout the history of this country, but California, to use as an example, for many decades, people flocked to California, not just to necessarily move to Hollywood and become a movie star or go into the entertainment business. Obviously, there was some of that, but it's a wonderful and beautiful state geographically, and they've made some decisions over the last several decades that have really made the state, some may consider somewhat of a mess the way it's run. And many businessmen, small and large, our friend Joe Rogan has obviously just announced within this last week he's going to move from California to Texas, and it's just one guy. When you read that story,
whole crew is going, like Joey
exactly.
Diaz, and so that's kind of interesting to hear.
But the list of businesses that have actually just picked up and left for another state, I think they don't hate California. It's going to be an impact to make that actual move and everything happen. But they obviously agree that with all said and done, it will be a benefit to do, or they wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, and it just coming back from Los Angeles, probably I don't know, a month and a half ago and stuff, and also saying I just actually walked around Chaz yesterday, and everything's pretty much cleaned up now. It's just all tagged up. A lot of Black Lives Matter. A lot of what ACAB? What is ACAB? All cops are bad. I saw a lot of that as well, but a lot of tents, and this is just kind of the biggest phenomenon that's been happening the past few years is also the camps, the homeless camps as well. And I think it's probably part of the reason why people are wanting to leave as well, Seattle. And
sure,
what was homelessness that bad when you were younger? Kind of go from your earlier life to now.
I kind of thought about that when we were talking about having this visit, and I didn't even know. I suppose at one level I wasn't aware of any homelessness when I was very young. I mean, I'm sure there was some, but we did live near some railroad tracks and a rail yard, and the kids in our neighborhood we wouldn't go down there all the time, but we used to go down there and hang out a little bit. And on occasion you'd see these guys, and they were just called bums. I mean, that was just the phrase. It wasn't, we didn't hate these guys. As a matter of fact, if anything, we kind of were fascinated by them. And
were they were they train hoppers?
Yes. Yes.
Train hoppers. Yeah.
And that was the word, is these guys just would move around the country or the region or wherever, hopping freight trains. And I remember talking with them a couple times and not being scared of them at all. And just, like I say, it was more of a fascination that they didn't have a house and they didn't have a car, and they're
kind of like homeless hippies, huh?
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, but
they were kind of normal,
Yeah. And it's funny though, because the that whole hippie area was pretty new at that point. This would have been very late 60s, early 70s. And they were more short-haired guys. I mean, these just look like guys. It was almost like a picture of a guy you'd see in the Depression, in a soup line, in a suit or something, even if they were dirty. And I'm not saying they all wore suits, but they weren't
Yeah.
they weren't young bum hippie guys that we think of as today. They looked like,
They were probably getting a free pass at a gym, and they were just showering and just moving to the next town.
I
And kind
don't
of,
even know if there were gyms back then. Looking back on it, you really wonder what they did. I mean, I think there were I think there were missions. I think there were soup kitchen type places back then, but there wasn't near the level of support that people in those guys' positions today have available to them. So you really wonder how they got by. I'm telling you, some of their stories would be fascinating. Talk about a person to have a conversation with.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I did notice a lot of train hopping over in Russia as well, and it's just kind of I think it's just kind of a teenage rebellion thing, young adult rebellion thing and stuff. You just kind of go hop around and you just kind of make it work and backpack around and stuff. A lot of them were travelers too. A lot of them
Mm-hmm.
were around the UK and or the EU, just kind of type of groups would do it and stuff. But yeah, they were clean. They were clean as they could be, and they just kind of were traveling on little to no money. And I don't even think they were bumming. They were just kind of making things work and just kind of getting by and stuff like that. So
Yeah, well, I think between hostels and whether it's a free train ride or even a paid train ride, which isn't extraordinarily expensive,
mhm.
it's surprising that a person can travel around without a lot of money, um, and it can be, young people often do that for a couple of years to have an interesting lifestyle. I guess it's almost like the van lifestyle is the new biggest thing now, I guess.
Mhm.
And there's people that are converting vans to be able to live in and just traveling around and living in them. And I guess technically you could consider them homeless, but it's not a homelessness based on an economic, shortfall. It's a lifestyle they're choosing. And yeah, I saw something on that recently, and it was kind of interesting. I think people I know you're fascinated about getting out and seeing the country and seeing the world, and it's a good thing to do. Most of us get pretty locked into our little groove between our job and our home and our lives and our family and our responsibilities. And I think those are all good things. Don't misunderstand me, but
Mhm.
travel's good. I think it helps people relate to other people in the world when they do it.
Yeah. Yeah, you become more tolerant. I think a big way to build tolerance is, when we see something foreign and new, we kind of laugh and we make fun of it because just a funny accent or things like that. Yeah, a lot of people I have worked with or that I just been around and stuff. I'm not going to name any names and stuff, but they'll hear a funny accent, a Russian, an Asian, whatever kind of accent and stuff. I'm just used to it now, so I just like understand what they're saying because I've been around it so much. But um, other people just get frustrated and mad. They're like, I don't know what the fuck she's saying. And God, this is so annoying and dumb. And when they speak to me after I hear them, I'm just like, it's not that hard to understand them. I don't know why you're so upset or mad about it and stuff. And I don't know, just I noticed my tolerance to uncommon things. To me, it's just like kind of cool and funny. I'm just like, oh yeah, I know this, and that's just how they are and stuff. But to people, who don't travel and who don't go around to other countries or even other states, they don't realize, and they kind of stray away towards there, kind of make fun of it more. But
Yeah, and
oh, sorry.
I think everybody relates to whatever quote group they're officially a part of or something. But I myself, just like you, a very good current friend of mine, back to previous jobs, friends I had, back to in school, friends I had. I often was the most fascinated by people who were maybe born in another country, possibly did a ton of traveling or a combination of the two,
Mm-hmm.
because it was just more interesting to find out not only the differences, but really what it came down to is the similarities that are pretty
Mm-hmm.
universal throughout the world, and that I think kind of helps a person gain even a better perspective on people in other countries in the world.
Yeah. Now going to like the current, moving to more of the current like homelessness issue. What do you think? What happened, in your opinion? What is happening, or what do you think happened?
No, I think it's a great question, and I think society really needs to discuss and have a very long conversation about this subject. And I think it's very complicated, and I think it's a lot of things. But I think there's a documentary recently about the homeless in Seattle, and they made a very good point, which is, in large part, this is a heroin or drug problem manifesting as a homeless problem. And so, if you built 12,000 houses in Seattle and gave one to all 12,000 of these people, you wouldn't necessarily be fixing the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe people need help. I believe most people that are in trouble need help, and I think many of them are the cause of their own problem. And even if they are, I still believe they need help. Many of or some of the people are in their situation beyond their control. Maybe it's a bad decision or two, but some bad luck, and I think those people need help too. But I think we need to. I remember homeless was when I started paying attention to politics in the 80s. Believe it or not, homelessness was a big issue then. And I'd really never heard of it before then. I think that was the first time it really came out that X number of people live on the street and this is horrible. And, as usual, the subject was kind of used against certain people politically, like many subjects tend to be used as weapons in politics. But I think even back then, and I was very young, and of course the subject concerned me because nobody wants to think about somebody not having a place to sleep or live or eat or go to the bathroom. But
Mm-hmm.
I think, you've got multiple different categories of people that are homeless. You've got mentally ill, you've got drug addicted, all the way down to the gal with her 2 kids that her husband was a jerk and he left her with no money, and she was evicted from her apartment. And so whether it's 3 or 6 or 9 different general categories of people that are found themselves homeless in, I don't think there's one solution for those 6 or 9 categories. I think there's 6 or 9 solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of these people need maybe a little bit more tough love than others, and some of them need some of them are doing their best to get up and running and need the kind of help that would. I think it was the mayor of San Antonio. I forget the city now. Maybe it was Albuquerque. It wasn't a gigantic city, but it wasn't a tiny city.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget exactly how this started, but I mean, he literally asked some guy on the street one day if he would be willing to work to get some money or some assistance. And the guy said, sure, of course. And next thing you know, the city developed this program that these guys are, picking up litter off the street or whatever it was. They were doing some basic stuff, but it was being organized by the city, and they were getting paid cash daily. And I think this is just an amazing program, because usually you'd say, well, you can't pay them cash, or you have to withhold their taxes, or you got to get into all these things that these quote rules that would usually stop just the immediate help that was needed. And it's really caused a lot of good. It's given these guys or people something to do. It's given them some hope. It's given them the immediate help and financially with the cash payments daily. And I don't know if I saw any big follow-up on the story. I mean, it still exists out there, but to the best of my knowledge, it's that bridge that many of them need to go from this very bad spot they're in to, let's call it, normal functioning. I mean, that bridge is very difficult to cross, I believe, even if you're capable of crossing it. If a person has mental issues or is in a very bad way in some of these other subjects, I think that group needs a different kind of help.
Yeah. That's I don't know. Yeah, I see some other places where they just don't tolerate it at all. Are you a big believer of the broken window theory?
Absolutely. And I think that's what, speaking of 10, 20 years ago, I remember reading a story.
Well, hold on.
That,
Let's back up.
Oh, go ahead.
Let's
Go ahead.
discuss what the broken window theory is for people who don't know. Do you want to explain it, or do you want me to?
you give me your take on it, and then I'll tell you my
Basically,
take on it.
to give it like an easy summed up theory is basically you start with a good city, brand new construction and everything else. It starts with a broken window, and then it basically it devalues the place. It's kind of like a butterfly effect for more crime and worse crime and just the deterioration of a city in the future. So if you are just kind of relaxed about people, peeing on the sidewalk, sleeping on benches and things like that, once you kind of slowly grow into that degeneracy, it could cause an increase of crime, murder, rape, blah blah blah, all that stuff.
Exactly, and that's basically my understanding too. In the analogy, the window's not fixed; it's either boarded up or left open. If it's not
Yes,
repaired
yes, yeah.
right away, you're not maintaining a an acceptable level of behavior in society. And I absolutely believe this is really what has taken place in Seattle. The I don't know if you want it hard to be homeless, but you don't want it easy to be homeless either. And I know that sounds like very easy for you and I to have this conversation and we're not homeless. And I don't mean to make it sound like that at all. I do believe many of the current programs are hurting the people that are homeless, not helping them. So I reject that. To be against the way the city of Seattle has handled its homelessness means um, I or whoever might have a similar position is not interested in helping these people. I absolutely believe helping them is a good thing to do, and I believe what's happening now is not helping them. That's the
Mhm.
irony. And so um, this article I was mentioning was written of all places, like some Florida newspaper. Something wrote an article about how in Seattle the homeless had 22 meals a day available to them, and I know that sounds kind of like a ridiculous title, but that's exactly what this article was about. And it talked about all these different levels of help at free meals throughout the city that somebody can get. And obviously, at one level, you think, well, this is a wonderful thing because nobody who's homeless in Seattle is, at least they're not going to go hungry or something like that. I guess it'd be the idea. But I think at one point, and maybe it's still the case, I think Seattle had the third highest homeless population, third only to New York and Los
San
Angeles.
Francisco, or yeah.
Actually, it was Los Angeles. San Francisco's right there too. But when you consider our population is less than a million, and those cities have multiple millions of people, we really have a disproportionate problem in this area with this
Mhm.
situation. And I think that the situation needs help, but I think the way they've been handling the situation up to this point can't be helping, or there would be less of it.
Do you think? Let me look up her name really quick. Kashama Sawant, and that whole city council is driving the issue.
Yeah, this council member Schwant is kind of a fascinating character, and when anybody has any passionate beliefs, as crazy as I might view the belief, you got to admire somebody for their passion, I suppose, at one level. But I believe that her political views is what is hurting Seattle. I'm sure she would disagree. It'll be interesting to see after the situation this year in Seattle if the citizens of Seattle decide to make a change politically. Um, I think when you have one party rule for multiple decades, there's not really a check and balance on that power. It's
Hmm.
not necessarily about one side's good, one side's bad. It's if both sides have to legitimately compete with each other for power in a particular area, I think you wind up with a little bit.
People are
Um,
trying to make more of the right moves.
I think people are trying to make more of the right moves, exactly. And I think when one party is in control for decades, it's natural that that power could be taken for granted, and
Hmm.
you could start wanting to do whatever you thought was best, no matter if it was in the best interest of the majority of the people who lived in the city.
Now, I have read Atlas Shrugged, and so have you. And
Yes.
I don't think I have ever seen a similarity, from the book to reality, until that one moment when Sawant basically said, "Yeah, we they passed the tax. I think it was like the head tax or something like that." And they
Yes.
basically said, "Yes, we're going to go after you. We're going to go after your institution." It basically, the underlying thing sounded like, "We're just going to basically take over your company. You're an evil company, blah, blah, blah," and all that stuff. And trust me, I have my issues with the business practices of Amazon. I think that I don't think they pay their members as much. I think there are certain things that they can do differently to make themselves more successful. But again, it's their business, and I don't care. I mean, most of the citizens in the world love the 2 day shipping, or now it's even like 1 day shipping, and everything else, and the amount of jobs that they are bringing. But I just it was so Atlas Shrug. There was such an Atlas Shrug moment when she was basically said, "Yes, we just have started, and we are going after you some more." And I guarantee you, Jeff Bezos is probably thinking to himself, if they keep going, we're going to get out of here. And I know he
Sure.
has a lot of money right now, and I know he is able to afford those things right now. But it can come to a certain point where he's going to go. I mean, shit, he'll probably look at Texas, Kansas, Idaho, or wherever else, and the property value of Redmond is going to just dip. It's going to cause like the probably one of the worst crashes in Seattle in history. If they have members like Sawant and these other people just going and hurting the business.
Yeah, I think, and I thought I heard at one point, I'd have to look exactly how this played out, but I heard at one point that Amazon was moving its corporate offices from Seattle to Bellevue, which obviously still keeps it in King County, but it does take it out of the city of Seattle. So I'm not sure
Because
as
yeah,
far
well, the
as
local taxes too, that would affect
exactly,
them. Yeah.
exactly. This would be a case where they would still pay King County taxes and they'd pay the city of Bellevue taxes, but they would not pay the city of Seattle taxes. And so I'm not really sure if this is gradual steps to pull out of Seattle anyway. Um,
Hmm.
the
How are the politics of the East Side? And for the listeners that don't know, basically kind of like the northeast side of Seattle. Once you go across the bridge or I-90, or if you kind of wrap around Lake Washington, basically there's kind of a wall where Lake Washington is, and you could go either 520 I-90, or you could go I-5 north and cut down 405. That kind of east part, northeast part is where most of the tech is. That is kind of our version of the Silicon Valley. I call it the Silicon Valley 2.0. And that is basically where all the tech is, and where the richer neighborhood is. Objectively speaking, it is
yes,
much more of the richer neighborhood, and that's where Bill Gates lives, over in Medina. So that's kind of up in the that's more Bellevue coast, Lake Washington line. But yeah,
yes, and Microsoft, the growth of Microsoft really, really grew. I mean, Bellevue. Speaking of Seattle in the old days, King County in the old days, Bellevue. You can find old pictures on the internet. Bellevue was a very small town, even much more recently, obviously, that Seattle was a very small town. And it's just been fascinating to see it grow up.
oh, it's
And
beautiful over there.
yes, Microsoft's had a big portion of that. I wouldn't, it's not so much like Bellevue's conservative and Seattle's liberal, but I think the farther you get out of Seattle, um, the
The
tech
less
industry.
friendlier it is.
Well, it's probably. I think the cities I think downtown Seattle, based on the current city council and the mayor, could be perceived as the least business friendly of the cities surrounding it. I think the farther you get out, I think cities don't over politicize business. I mean, they might
Hmm.
politicize certain issues, but I think they just understand business is what it is, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, we have a lot of celebrities and big tech CEOs over at the Redmond, by the Redmond Lake.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, just along that whole coastline. Yeah, a bunch of ex NFL football, and Microsoft people. I have a few friends that live up there as well. Shout out to Karina. I know her dad's kind of big up into Microsoft as well, and yeah, it just seems friendly over there. Everything's pretty peaceful. It doesn't look like there's a lot of degradation over there. It seems like they really take care. I think with a lot of rich people over there, I think they really push to make sure that since they're paying a premium price for the area they live in, they want to make sure that there is no crime. It's clean and it's a beautiful place to be in, and I believe it is. Kirkland is kind of more of the. I feel like Kirkland is kind of like the more of the social, a little bit classier social. I think downtown Bellevue is more of the, oh, I'm rich, I'm going to show off social area. But and then once you go more north up into Bothell and Woodinville, it's a little bit more of the hipster rich. And then once you go over further east to Redmond, like around the lake and stuff, that's just like power.
It is funny the way that the regions lay out like that. But I really like Kirkland too. I mean, Kirkland being right on the water still has somewhat of a small town feel. Kirkland's a great city.
Oh yeah, the restaurants and it's kind of the younger generation of people around my age and stuff. So I love going there, and yeah, it's just kind of all those areas are different in their own ways, but they're wonderful in their own way, and that's kind of just what I'm seeing now. It's sad because Seattle. What was before then? What was the East Side back in the day? What would be the rich area?
So back in the day, we had a family friend. My main connection when I think of east of Lake Washington as a kid, we had friends of the family that lived on Magnolia, and Queen Anne and Magnolia were similar.
Magnolia is rich.
Magnolia was thought of as higher of the two, even though, trust me, Queen Anne had its mansions and Magnolia around the outer skirts had its marginal areas. But in general, Magnolia was thought of as to be a little bit higher of a caliber neighborhood than Queen Anne. But we had a friend in Magnolia who at one point they moved over to the east side, and they moved over into the Clyde Hill area, which is kind of part of Medina. It's just that whole, what today is a very, very expensive neighborhood. And at the time I'm sure it was similar to Magnolia. I don't think this was a gigantic move up financially. It was just a regional move over to the other side of the lake. And I remember driving over there, and you know how things are when you're like a kid. It felt like it was 60 miles away, even though it was 10 miles away. It's just across the bridge there. But it was, the neighborhoods are still this way, but it was a lot of trees. It was a very small town feel, and that's why the growth of downtown Bellevue is just, it's just been insane and amazing, and it is beautiful. But like Seattle, it's going to grow fast, and it may wind up with its growing pains too. But I don't think it's taken quite as weird of a political twist as Seattle has with its mayors and with its city councils and with its desires of social engineering.
What was Washington and even Seattle a lot more conservative back in the day? I know Reagan won the state. I think
Reagan did win the state. Yes, I think it may have been 88. Yeah, it's funny because Seattle's, I think, always been known as to be pretty Democrat or liberal, but it wasn't like this far left or socialism thing like the movement is now. I think we've, as many people may or may not know, Washington State does not have an income tax. I believe we are only one of 5 or 6 states in the nation that doesn't have an income tax, which sounds like a very conservative thing, even though we're a very blue state. And so we've always
I like to say one thing though. I don't think we are such a blue state. If you cut I think we're half a blue state, just because if you take the counties away from the coastline, there is no blue area. I think maybe Yakima, I'm not sure, but like we're so red once you go past the mountains. on the east side.
Sure. And when you look at the blue-red map on the internet, if you do it by state, like you say, it shows the entire state of Washington blue. If you do it by county, it shows that out of our, I forget if we have 39 counties, but 6 or 7 of them are probably blue, the rest are red. But that is where the majority of the people live. So there's no question we're well over 50% we're blue as far as individuals, just because of the core of, I think Washington has about 7 million people, and 3 or more live probably in King, Pierce, and Snohomish County. 4 or more probably. I think 3 might live in King alone. But
yeah,
but Washington, yeah, it's very unique in the sense that I think there's some interesting aspects of our Constitution. You know, not only does the federal government, or not only does the nation have a Constitution, but each state has its own Constitution. And I think there's some unique stuff written in there. So I think all these Western states, you know, what's kind of fascinated me always about the Western part of our country was that there were the people that came to this country from Europe or wherever, and they tended to land on the East Coast. And many of them just stayed there. And some of them who came over, the East Coast had already been established for 100 or 150 years. And many just stayed there and just felt it was enough to be in the United States, and out of the country they left. But many others, that wasn't enough for them. They still wanted to go west, where it was still very, very rural at the point our parents and grandparents came over here. And so I think there's an interesting thing about a lot of people who live out west. It just seems like there's kind of an independent and a pioneering spirit that may not exist quite as deeply as some of our East Coast cities, which we've had people living in for almost 300 or 400 years now.
Yeah, it's you definitely feel like you hit a different state once you go across the mountain, or even once you hit kind of like the top of the mountain. You go from water to woods, forest, mountain, then desert.
Yes.
And lakes, and just kind of, it's a weird transition. I mean, because you travel all over the state stuff.
And we're blessed, because in this state you can, and not very much drive time going different directions, you can really get a little bit of everything. And I do love and appreciate that about this state. The state does a lot of weird things I'm kind of not that crazy about, but as far as geographically and the natural resources we have here, from our lakes and mountains to the sound to even to the warm desert.
You could dive, you could fish, you could go hike, you could ski, snowboard, hike around the deserts. You know, it's just when it comes to outdoors, I feel like not a lot can really compare to it. I mean, sure, I guess you could say Idaho and maybe just like Oregon as well. But yeah, we have a really diverse climate in Washington State.
Yeah.
We also have the perfect climate for wine as well. We have a $50 billion industry in wine.
Oh, it's gotten huge. I think I read at one point, I forget if it was 50 or 75, maybe it was even more, wineries within like 20 or 30 minutes of the Tri-Cities or something. I mean, there's just a gigantic industry. The climate's perfect to grow it. They've really been dialing it in the last 20 years or to where it really took off. I mean, there's always been a lot of produce, apples and other things grown on the eastern half of our state. But wine, yes, is just, we've really done wonderful things in that whole category, which I know you've become interested in more recently, wine.
Yeah. I don't think we are close to Calistoga and Napa Valley yet, but I definitely feel like we are getting there. Apparently, I heard some guy told me a long time ago that Bruce Willis has a place over in Walla Walla. A lot of celebrities have houses over in Walla Walla just because of wine.
Well, I knew he did. I knew him going all the way back when he was married to Demi Moore. I had always heard that those guys got a place up in Lake Coeur d'Alene, and definitely a lot of stars have kind of drifted up to that part of the country. But Walla Walla's beautiful too. I do get down there every 3 weeks for my work, and it's a great town. Washington, traveling in Washington is is fun. With my current job, I've actually had to go to places, or not had to, but I actually go to places that I have never been my whole life, even living in the state. And it is a great state to travel in. There's a lot of good stuff to see.
Yeah, definitely. Now, if you I wouldn't say necessarily if you were a king for a day, but if you were in charge and if you wanted to fix things up in Washington, and if you kind of had your own way, let's just say you're the governor, senator, I'm not even sure how I would describe it best, but if you basically had your way and if you had proposals to change things, how would you change Seattle into what you believe would be perfect in your vision?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I guess my initial thought comes back to my belief that nothing should be attempted to be changed drastically immediately. I don't think it's a
Mm.
solid change. I don't think it's a lasting change. I would like to, but as far as subtle things, I think that could change. I think they need to. I think they need to go back to enforcing the laws. And again, I'm not talking about cracking skulls or anything like that. You know, when Mayor Giuliani was elected to New York, the city was in pretty rough shape. There was a lot of, I mean, it had this wonderful history, similar to Seattle, but I think the murder rate when Mayor Giuliani was elected was 2,500 people a year, which is just insane, even though obviously it's a large city. And by
Mm-hmm.
the end of his term, it was term limited, I believe it's 2 terms. I think the murder rate had come down from 2,500 a year to 600 a year. And when Mayor Bloomberg was elected, I think that trend continued to go down to like 300. Now,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, it's on the way back up. I don't think that's accidental. I know at one point, Mayor Giuliani talked about that you almost like your broken window or the broken window theory we talked about earlier. He talked about that you change and you fix the small things and work your way towards the big things versus vice versa. Not that you don't investigate murder and not that you don't attempt to prevent murder, but back then there were guys that used to wash your windows at red lights, whether you wanted them to or not. And these would have been
Mm-hmm.
possibly homeless, probably homeless guys. But unfortunately, this might be a dirty, oily rag. I mean, this isn't necessarily somebody who's doing you some service that you want. It became kind of
Yeah,
nuisance.
it's a forced service. Yeah.
It's kind of a forced thing. Some of it was a shakedown. Sometimes these people would be kind of aggressive and not very happy if you weren't interested in financially compensating them for what they did for you. And from the squeegee guys to graffiti to issues like this, he cleaned it up from that level on the way up. And of course, they fought crime, and of course, they did the other things they were
Yeah.
police activity that they were
But
for
he put
more
some
serious
extra
crimes.
focus in things that would kind of turn a blind eye normally.
Yes, they literally call it cleaned up the city. And again, this can be done without dragging people away in the middle of the night, never to be seen again. This was ultimately just enforcing laws that probably already existed, and the previous administrations were not enforcing these laws. So,
Mm-hmm.
and back to our police talk. Again, I think the police and the community should have a good relationship. I do think the police should work with the community. I don't think they should just drive through the community in SWAT gear and military vehicles when that's going on is fine. I do think that is the wrong approach, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the vast majority of the people who live in these higher crime rate communities, even as of recently, have made it clear they want more police. They do not want less police. Again, doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about and fixing certain problems that has led to some of this anxiety that's out there on this subject. But I think that I think that Seattle could return to its greatness, and I don't think it will until the citizens who live there decide to use the advantage of multiple political parties and make them work for and earn the votes you give them.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's going to be getting a lot worse before it gets better?
That's a great question too. I mean, one could say you would have never imagined the police walking away from a police station and allowing rioters to take it over, no matter how just the supposed cause was of the rioters. I think that sent a horrible message to the citizens of the city. And I'm really curious as to see if there's going to be any kind of a political change in the city. Again, it's pretty dark blue, obviously much more so than the state. And so I would love to see a change, but it would, at this point, I'd hate to say it would surprise me if there was one.
Mm-hmm. Do you think what would make you leave?
That's a good question. Technically, I'm outside of the city of Seattle, but I'm still inside King County, and I'm very near Seattle. So I still feel like I face all the impact as if I lived there and don't live there. What would cause me to leave? I mean, I ultimately,
Kind of generally speaking, like I know we obviously have grandma and we have like other like things like tied to us and stuff, but like if you were just kind of a normal, I feel like if it was just us, just your family and stuff, or it just even you and your wife, what do you think would like kind of push you over the edge or make you strongly consider?
It's funny because at one point, your mom and I talked about, there was this period about 10 years ago or 20 years ago where this whole urban living thing was really making this revitalization, and downtown was making some improvements. And we'll come back to downtown because I know this was about to Seattle. I do got a couple things to say about the changes in Seattle over the decades, but downtown was kind of becoming revitalized. They were taking blocks that were literally boarded up buildings and making nice new restaurants and bookstores. And that Pacific Place Mall on 7th Avenue there, that used to be
Are you talking
run
about
down
Westfield Center? Westlake Center?
No, it's actually east of Westlake Center, about 2 blocks. There's a movie theater up with it.
That big huge thing, the kind of the roof. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yes, that neighborhood used to be almost condemned. I mean, it was amazing how much it changed. And when it changed, people are out at night. There's restaurants going on. It's near the Paramount Theater. I mean, a lot was going on. Downtown used to literally, it didn't end at Fifth Avenue, but anything east of Fifth Avenue got very, very rough. And like I say, there were old condemned buildings. It went through this weird transitional phase. But during the period of the revitalization, again, your mom and I talked about kind of that fascinating potential lifestyle of living downtown, walking distance from everything, from stores, from restaurants, from the Pike Place Market, from parks, Freeway Park. There's still a part of me that would love the idea of that. And then you see how the city is managing its problems, and you think, I don't think I could do that. So
it's rough. A lot of those streets, especially around that area you're talking about, that's around the Westlake Center. I mean, we just had a shooting over there.
Yes.
Yes. A couple weeks ago. Homeless people. I mean, there's a lot of crazies out here. I mean, I know downtown you're always going to kind of get some weird people and stuff, but I'm talking about a lot of. I feel like an average is about like 3 to 5 mentally ill people on every block of Seattle.
It is, and
it's like trying to avoid a bunch of zombies over there.
It is, and as much as I'm not this big government guy, when I see some of these people that are clearly mentally ill, I'm convinced we are not doing enough for these people. How and what we do is the key. I don't want to spend a whole bunch of money and have them still be a mess, because then it's just a waste of money. But I do think we do need to help these people, not just so they're cleared off the streets and everybody else can go about their business and not be harassed by them. It's not about harassment. It's about what's best for both parties, the actual individuals that are mentally ill, that are on the streets, that need the help, and the rest of the people that want to live in and function and participate in the city. So I'm definitely an optimist, and I would love to see some kind of a revitalization in Seattle. And there's so much economic activity there because of Amazon and other companies that are down there. It should be going on as we speak. Again, back to New York and Rudy Giuliani experience. It was the same 8 or 10 million people that live in the city that lived there 7 years later that lived there in the previous 7 years, but just the adjustment of these policies made it one of the safest large cities in America. It was an amazing transformation, and it happened because of city public policies. It was nothing else. It was a desire to take a different approach and fix problems that went on in the city. And to me, it was proof it can be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the funny thing is we don't notice that necessarily on the east side, and I see it's now creeping more towards the the north side now over in Lake City, because
Yes.
Lake City, I had a girlfriend over there, or I don't know, we were just talking, it was like kind of a young thing or whatever. Hello, Zoe. But I went out over there to visit her a long time ago. Maybe I was like 16 or something like that. And it was the most beautiful city I saw. You're right on the lake. Everything was just rich. I'm like, wow, this is, a place I would live and retire at. This is amazing. I took a drive down 145th heading towards Lake City, and then I was going to cut up and go over to Bothell because I was visiting a friend. Someone threw a can of soda at my car. I saw heroin, crack, homeless people fighting, just everything, and it just looked like hell. And this happened all within 15 years, and it's shocking me now that like this place where I grew up thinking it was like one of the most beautiful cities right on the lake is now kind of dangerous.
Yes.
What do you think they're doing? What do you honestly think that there's the city council members and the leaders? What do you think they're thinking? Are they ignorant to it because they just live in their nice mansions up, and I don't know where politicians would be. They're probably all over the place, but I guarantee you they drive by and see it, and are they just like, whatever? They're going to still vote for me or what?
It is a great question, and I do think that you can't help but think anybody wants it the way it is, and I guess maybe they just believe that it's being caused by things that they can and can't control. I'm not really sure, but back to the documentary I mentioned earlier, which was entitled Seattle is Dying.
Yeah. And
it's online. Anybody can watch it. And
it's free on YouTube.
Should be free on YouTube. Yeah. And you can agree with it, disagree with it. It's not so much about that. But at the end of the program, it did talk about it talked about a program of all places. I think it was back in Rhode Island or something. So obviously, it didn't have to do with Seattle.
The women ran like drug thing or the
rehab
kind of program thing.
Yeah. Yes. And at first, when they started that portion of the segment, I thought, okay, here we go. Public money is going to fix all problems. But I watched and I listened, and I was pleasantly surprised that the program involved, I guess you'd call it punishment up front and then rehab. I think sometimes when there's no punishment up front, and what I mean by punishment up front is we're talking about people who had broken the law, we're talking about heroin addicts, we're talking about people that you can't just, if a program doesn't have the equivalent of a rock bottom, you're less apt to have this person helped. So yeah. These men described the help they're getting now, but it started out with some prison sentences, depending on either crimes they had committed or stuff that had caused them to, quote, be in trouble before they got the help. But they made it clear that this program has saved their life. And I don't believe we're saving any of these people's lives in Seattle right now, or trying to.
Yeah.
And I think we need to. Because I think how we help them is what it comes down to. And I believe, I'm not an expert on the budget of the city of Seattle and what they do and don't spend their money on, But my understanding is
Well, too much on the
large.
tunnel.
Well, but even on this particular area, I believe large amounts of money are being spent to fix this problem, and the problem is same or worse. So it isn't even that we need to spend money on this problem. The thing is, we are spending money on this problem, and the problem's getting worse. And that's why I come back to, if there's no legitimate political competition between people to run and manage the city, you're not going to get as good of results when you don't have both sides vying for your vote, having a fair shot at being given a shot to work on and fix these problems.
I personally think that the COVID and the riots have actually kind of put more exposure to mayors, to more local and state politicians than probably at any other time, because I feel like they just kind of blended in the background and everybody was focusing on federal, or the Senate, kind of the Senate up, not really the governors and the mayors of the big cities and the states and stuff like that. So I'm really curious how the next upcoming election is going to be, not necessarily for the federal level, but for the state level. I feel like people are just going to just vote down the ballot, kind of regardless. But I'm curious if some of these people are maybe going to get voted out. I'm curious how our mayor's going to do, how our governor is going to do, and even the city council as well. I think Amazon is going to hit back for Sawant, and I don't know. I'm curious how it's going to be. Do you think there might be some kind of change? Do you think there's going to be a little bit, maybe a surprise? In your opinion?
I hope there's going to be change. I'm not a big Governor Inslee fan. I'll be happy to admit that he's dealing with the COVID mess and it's not easy to deal with. So I get it that he has some decisions to make, that if he makes decision A, he's going to upset half the people. If he makes decision B, he's going to upset the other half of the people. So I'm more than happy to acknowledge he's in a tough spot with COVID. I don't think these guys are in a tough spot with the riots. I think they're just making the wrong decisions not to control them better. And again, I'll emphasize, I'm not talking about peaceful protests. Personally, I believe a very large, completely peaceful protest where a whole bunch of people show up, not a single thing is broken, not one piece of garbage is left. They show up and they make their presence and they make their message clear, and then they leave and go home. I think that's one of the most powerful things that can happen in society. The violence is giving the state/government permission to crack down on the violence. It's, in a weird way, it's almost giving them what they want, assuming they're against what the protest is about. I don't think in this case they're necessarily against what the protest is about. But what does not give them the authority to crack down on the protesters is to do absolutely nothing wrong during the protest. I think it's extremely powerful when that happens. Back to Jay Inslee. I mean, we're historically a blue state. Seattle's historically a very blue city, but we had an election for governor a couple of years ago, several years ago, and the election was so close it took a couple of weeks to count the vote. So, if Eastern Washington has a higher turnout because they're sick of not feeling like they're represented in Olympia, or even if people on the I-5 corridor here reevaluate if the current leadership is giving them what they want, we could have some surprises. And as a matter of fact, I think council member Sawant, I think she was close to losing her last race. I think it took several days to count, and her support went down. Obviously, I think she ended up with enough to get over the top, but not by much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not sure on how those local politics work. Is it every 2 or 4 years?
I should know too, and I believe it's 2. One interesting thing about the Seattle City Council, I believe this is still the way. Again, I don't live in Seattle anymore, but some cities actually have districts that the city council members represent a particular area of the city. I believe in Seattle, all the members are elected by the entire city. So I think they call it at large or something. But if you district out the city, you have a chance of, let's say, in West Seattle or in near Shoreline,
Northgate or whatever.
Yeah. When you have different areas, you have a chance to get a little bit more diversity on the council. When every single person in Seattle elects every single member of the council, you wind up with a little less diversity. And when I say diversity, obviously I'm not talking about ethnic diversity. I'm talking about political diversity, but I don't even mean some Republicans and some Democrats. Even if all 9 of them are still Democrats, but they're different in they're different Democrats in their exactly. Some might be a little bit more classically liberal, and then obviously some might be socialist if they represent a district on Capitol Hill. I don't mind that. It's not something I would vote for and support, but I wouldn't oppose them from being able to run, because that's not a good thing either.
But the unfortunate thing is that we obviously have a pretty good understanding of how that government structure is approached. But a lot of people who are in college and who even may be listening to this as well don't realize that that's how things are going and how things are ran. And I don't even know like too much about locality as well, but I think it's more important to focus on the locality more than the federal government. I don't think the federal government really affects you that much besides taxes. And of course, if they go into like some kind of like major war and stuff like that, but I feel like the blame for like the degradation of just some of these cities and even the states are more done because of your local and state politics, and they kind of just like blame one side, and it is like kind of an easy thing. It's like, oh, Trump is the reason why this is happening, and it's not the case. That San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles, or Oregon, Portland, and things like that have kind of slid down to a lot of, I don't know, all these bad things that have been happening to them for the past few years, and I don't think they realize where the root of the issue is coming from.
Absolutely, and I hope people do pay closer attention to this, because it absolutely has nothing to do with the federal government. I mean, the vast majority of crimes are state crimes. Obviously, bank robbery is a federal crime. There are crimes that are federal crimes, but almost every crime is a state crime. And this administration or any other administration is not telling Washington State what kind of laws, state laws, they have to have or don't have to have. We who live in this state have elected people who have created our laws. We decide when we do and don't enforce them. Obviously, they should always be enforced, but we have the power to change them. And I do think it's a little ironic that during some of these latest protests, and I take the same position. If this was several years ago and Barack Obama was our president, Seattle is going to decide what they're going to do and not going to do as far as allowing criminal activity during protesting. And I do think it's possible to, as a matter of fact, I think Dallas recently had a large protest, and I think they arrested 700 people. Seattle's chief of police is an African-American female. Dallas's chief of police is an African-American female. This doesn't have anything to do with the race of the leadership of the police department. This has to do with their approach on what kind of activity and behavior they're going to allow and what kind of activity and behavior they're not going to allow.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the defund the police movement and some of the radical things you do hear from the Black Lives Matter movement, do you think there is a big consensus, or do you think it's just propped up because they're putting a lot of money into the marketing to it?
I absolutely think it's propped up. I think, and to give
hold on, and let me just say one thing. I don't think necessarily the group and some of the members of the group are bad people, or they have these like radical Marxist movements, but there are some people on the fringe that are saying defund the police, and having all these kind of socialist, kind of Marxist policies. You could see it like right on their website and stuff. I feel like the group has been kind of hijacked a little bit, and it's causing more division than help in these communities. So
it absolutely is. The to give the defund the police movement the benefit of the doubt for just a minute, when a couple of specific points are made, that whether it's community policing, whether it's a relationship between the police force and the community, that a couple of fringe element points have been brought up that of course makes sense, that nobody's against, and nobody's stopping this community and that police force from doing that. It's their responsibility to do that. So that should be happening, and I'm completely with them on that. But as far as defunding law enforcement, the vast majority of the people disagree with this, including many interviews I see with people who live in some of these high crime affected neighborhoods. They've been interviewed. They've been asked if they think the police should be defunded, and they say absolutely not. They want more police. Now, of course, they don't want police abuse. Nobody does.
yeah.
But the police abuse is, I mean, when you take a city like Minneapolis, everybody from the mayor to the city council to the police chief, all the way down to the officer who had his knee on George Floyd's neck, these people are all part of one political party. This isn't one political party versus the other party. This isn't a normal case where one side can blame the other and say what's going on is your fault. One party has had nothing to do with Minneapolis for a long time. So this is an internal city problem that needs to be dealt with and addressed. And absolutely, as you mentioned, some of the original protesters that are against police brutality, they got 99% of this country on their side when it comes to that subject. They absolutely are. But you don't change, you can't make something better by making it worse. And I think cutting the size of the police force in half is not going to reduce crime.
I think it is kind of funny and hypocritical that the city, what was it, Minneapolis? George Floyd was killed. Was it Minneapolis? Yeah, Minneapolis.
Yes.
And I think it's funny that you have pretty much a whole group of Democratic mayors, governors, senators, blah blah blah, all that stuff. They're the ones who shoot them in the foot, and they kind of play this thing that, oh, this is just a whole general problem. When I was talking to Jack, he was saying that this has happened before multiple times, and it's their problem. It's a good way of deflecting, and they did a really good job of it, of making it a national issue rather than a localized issue.
Sure.
Yeah.
But again, police abuse and police brutality, this current movement going on, bringing that subject to the front burner and expressing the concern about how any of this is horrible for the citizens of this country that have rights. I'm 100% with them on that one point. Mm-hmm. As soon as they jump from that point beyond onto this other stuff that I believe is destructive for society, that has to be spoken out against, even if their original point is extremely valid.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like things will get better. I don't think things are going to get too crazy. When I spend my life or my working life online, I feel like it is just kind of propped up. And I think people are kind of putting down their phones and just actually going outside and realizing that things aren't as bad.
Sure.
Especially like with the police. And I feel like a lot of people are more pro police than more against the police, just because their interactions, them help save their life, them being related to them or whatever else. So I think that I want to say it seems like that more people are against them, but I have a feeling that more people are for them. I think inherently the police community is a good thing, and
of course,
and the thought of just getting rid of them, it terrifies many people. I think I think it could sway the election. In all honesty, I think people who don't not necessarily like Trump, or even some of their governors that are lean more towards the right, and they hear, oh, we're getting rid of the police. I think a lot of the centrists and the traditional Democrats are liberals. Are just going to say, no, fuck that. I'm going to vote for them because at least they are going to make sure or do everything they can to make sure that they have the police community intact.
Yes, and hopefully that what you described takes place as much or more at state and city levels than it even does at the federal government level, because
Yeah, I'm talking about,
technically
I
the
guess,
federal
just
government.
right side representation on state and
Sure,
federal level.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. And I think the right has abandoned a lot of the big cities for, I mean, you can only lose so many cycles in a row and decide, how many times you want to continue to put effort into a venture that might not pay off.
Yeah, they're
But
probably
again, this
unmotivated.
is, yeah, and they might need to and want to put their focus to where they think they could actually win or make a difference or something like that. But again, this would be my appeal to people who live in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and Los Angeles is, whatever party you consider yourself for and whatever your beliefs or views are on the other party, just the fact alone that if one side is in charge for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you're not going to get the best of what's available out there. Playing each side off each other in the sense of trying to get the best from either of them every 4 years, every 8 years, even if it's every 12 years. This has worked out better nationally, but locally, again, we have cities that have up to 70 and 90 years of one party rule. And unless everything in the city's going great, I mean, if they got 90 years of one party rule and everything in the city's going great and everybody's happy, then it's working. I get it. But if it's not working and one side's been in charge that whole time, I think the people really got to wonder or not if their support's being taken for granted and they're ultimately getting much less out of the people we hire to manage these cities and counties for us as they are getting.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I know you and I kind of agree on a lot of things, so I don't want to I kind of want to try and debate you, but your views and my views kind of mirror each other a lot. I think, yeah, I think it just kind of more of the reduction in the government and more of the reduction in the power. I feel like I I do travel a lot, as you know, and I do see some other countries, and it seems like some of them have more freedoms than us when it comes to like certain aspects. And I don't know. It's kind of getting to a weird time of it feels like kind of a make or break, especially with the COVID and the riots.
It
And
does. I mean, emotions are real high right now, and I hope everybody just kind of hangs on. And you hear about increasing suicide rates, and it makes you very sad. And I think we will have stability in the future, no matter who is the mayor of Seattle or the governor of Washington State or the president of the United States, for that matter. We will, because the stability or the lack of stability has more to do with all of us than the handful of people we elect to lead us. But I I think people need to think about, one of the problems I think, many of the problems I think we're discussing right now is because we tend to try to elect we tend to elect people who believe they can fix certain things through government, that those things may or may not be able to be fixed through government. They might have to be fixed in a different way, just locally or regionally or at the citizen level, or as you know, the church used to have a big role in helping um, people who needed help in our country's history in the past.
yeah,
And whether you're religious or not, I'm not a big religious guy, but whether you're religious or not, there was something about when the help more so was in that community, there was a little bit more of a check and balance to the help. There was a little bit more trying to make sure what was being given as help couldn't ultimately be used to hurt.
Hmm.
And so I think the Councilmember Sawant's crowd often believes every problem is fixable through government action by taking money from one person and giving it to somebody else. And I know that's simplistic the way I phrase that, but
Yeah.
my fear is, even if their desires are genuine, they might be trying to fix something that might be making the problem worse the way they're trying to fix it.
Yeah. Good intentions. Good
Yep.
intentions are good, but yeah, does good intentions, but it does harm.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
And Milton Friedman's one of my favorite guys, and one of his famous quotes is, the worst thing you can do is judge a government program by its intention versus by its result. I mean, if they
Hmm.
started out with a good intention, that's great. But if they ultimately have a detrimental result and we continue to focus on the intention, then we're not looking at it very realistically. And we're participating in making the situation worse.
Yeah. 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 And the only thing in my opinion, that I feel like the right side doesn't do a good job, and I feel like they're starting to kind of get into it a little bit, but I feel like their just marketing strategy is just their PR and their marketing to the people. I feel like it's kind of hindered a little bit, in my opinion, with tech, but and just like some of the education community and stuff like that. But I feel like they're harder to sell. I feel like they take much more effort to sell than they do for um, the more liberal Democrat Party.
Their messaging is horrible. Absolutely. And it always has been. And I don't get it. I think they always, I probably have just as much or more problem with the Republican Party than even the Democrat Party, in the sense that I think they just kind of have viewed themselves as, if what they're doing they believe is right, then that should be enough. And maybe what they do is right, maybe what they do is wrong. Depends on the subject, obviously. But I believe, a good example of what you're describing there is the 1960 presidential debate was the first debate that was ever televised between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. And there was a fascinating study that was done. And the people who listened to the debate on radio said Nixon won. And the people who watched the debate on television said John F. Kennedy won. And they all
Mhm.
heard the exact same thing, obviously.
Yeah.
And to me, what that proved was imaging. What people saw made the difference on TV, even if they heard the exact same thing. And I think that I guess we'll call them the left. I think the left, maybe it's the a little bit more control they might have in academia and media and entertainment. I'm sure that helps them, but um, they've definitely got a pretty good handle on getting their message out to people.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel yeah, I feel like for being on the right, or not necessarily being on the right, but a lot of right-sided politics takes a little bit more you have to kind of dive deeper into it, and there seems to be a little bit more of an effort in the explanation behind it. And I feel like on
Sure.
the left side, I feel like it's a little bit more simplistic. Some of it is. I'm not saying all of it, but I feel like it's definitely easier to sell liberalism to a child than it is for conservatism.
It is, even though I think people are kind of naturally at their core conservative, and I don't want to use that term, I don't just mean politically, but I think most people understand they are responsible for what they do. I don't want to oversimplify it. I guess if I say a bunch of things, it'll make it sound like it might not be accurate. But
No,
I think
yeah.
I think you've seen these. You've seen these. Where do I fall on the political spectrum tests online? And some of them even I think have some pretty ridiculous questions. It's A, B, C, and D. If I'm none of those, which one of the four do I pick? But I think when people take those, I think more people than not get surprised on those, and I think more people than realize it are more libertarian than they realize. And I think this is an area that the left and the right can actually come to an agreement on, is the libertarian aspects of given subjects that they both agree on. And I often say, and it's hard to do right now because we're in such a polarized period, but I kind of wish both sides would get together and kind of work on stuff that they both acknowledge they agree on. And if we could kind of clean some of that stuff up, then we could go back to debating and arguing about the things we disagree on, which ironically I think is less than half of the issues. I think we're all Americans, so to speak. I think most Americans on the major issues fall in a pretty similar spot, and unfortunately I think it's often the people who are in power in both parties, not just one party, that like to do this whole divide and conquer thing. Because if we're battling each other out here over X, Y, and Z issue on social media, we're less apt to paying attention to them misappropriating public money.
I think it's definitely like a MAD strategy, mutually assured destruction.
Sure.
Type of strategy that they use.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's complicated. I am going to wrap it up. I'm just going to ask one more question.
Oh, sure.
If you were to sell, I guess, your side of politics, which is a little bit more of the conservative libertarian side, how would you sell it? If I were to give you a pitch right now, how do you sell it to?
How do I think they should be presented to be more favorably viewed or something?
No, just I guess both, but yeah, for yourself, how would you sell it? And
I got you.
Appeal? Yeah,
I got you. Boy, that's a great question. I mean, I'm sure I could answer it better if I had a little bit more time to think about it. But how I would sell it is that I think most people do their best in life when they're free to become exactly who they ultimately are and want to be. And I'm not. I don't think all government help is destructive, but unfortunately, I think some of it turns out to be destructive. I mean, I'll use a current subject right now. Paying somebody more to stay at home than they can make work for a living is not good. It's just not good. Sorry. It's not good for whoever has to come up with that $600 a week to give it to them. And it's not good to pay somebody more to not do anything than to have them do something. Mike Rowe, I'm sure, would have an opinion on that also. This isn't just my opinion. But back to your general question, yeah, I just think reminding people that the freedom, the liberty we have in this country that most other countries do not have is something very special. It's something we need to cherish and hang on to. We can have our differences. We can evolve. We can grow. We can change. But I don't think calls to change by anything by 180 degrees, and I don't think calls for fundamental transformation are going to be good for this country,
especially at a rapid pace, like you were saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think we've hit about, I'd say, maybe 2 hours or so.
It went really fast. It was a blast. Maybe we'll pick another subject someday in the future and do it, but this was a fun, Spence.
Yeah, this was really fun. Thank you for coming on. Do you have anything to promote? Do you want to promote your business for route work or something? Or
nothing to promote at the moment, but on and off, I've worked on a book for years, and if I ever finish it, I would love to promote it on your show.
Yeah. Maybe you could come back and do it. So
that'd be good.
All right. Well, thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Spencer.